Have you ever felt completely alone in a crowded room?
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That is a heavy question right out of the gate.
right. But I mean, you know the feeling. You're surrounded by people. There's this hum of conversation, glasses clinking. Like life is happening all around you in vivid color,
Yeah.
and yet you feel entirely invisible, like you're operating on a completely different frequency, or, I don't know, looking at the world from behind this thick pane of soundproof glass.
It's a very specific, acute type of isolation
Mm,
because you can be physically closer to other human beings than at any other point in history,
right?
sharing the same air, the same pavement, the same
Yeah.
visual field,
Yeah.
and yet you remain completely untouched by them. And honestly, the denser the population, the more profound that glass wall feels.
Exactly. And usually when we explore extreme isolation on this show, we gravitate toward physical distance.
No, like the desert island trope.
Yeah. The desert island, a solitary confinement cell, the cabin deep in the snowy woods. But today we are going into something much more insidious because it happens in broad daylight, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people.
It's hiding in plain sight.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore the anatomy of urban loneliness, the psychology of the chronic daydreamer, and this intense, almost dangerous craving for human connection.
It's going to be a fascinating one.
Oh, for sure. We are going to look at what happens when a mind, completely starved of reality, constructs an elaborate fantasy world. And what happens when a real human being finally crashes into it.
And to do this, we are examining the beginning of Fyodor Dostoevsky's classic 1848 work, White Nights.
It's a total classic.
It really is. And specifically for those following along, we are using the Constance Garnett translation. We pulled this from a public domain text that was actually digitized recently in 2022. Yeah, with funding from the Kali Austin Foundation. So we have this highly accessible version to work with. Now, this is a text that predates Dostoevsky's Siberian exile.
Right.
It's subtitled A Sentimental Story from the Diary of a Dreamer. And what I love about it is it strips away the heavy, philosophical murder plots we usually associate with his later work.
Like Crime and Punishment, yeah.
Exactly. And instead, it gives us this incredibly intimate, almost agonizing psychological autopsy of a single, deeply lonely mind.
Okay, let's unpack this right now. Jump right into the deep end. Imagine living in a bustling metropolis, St. Petersburg, the jewel of the Russian Empire, for 8 whole years and not making a single friend.
8 years.
8 years. 0 acquaintances. I mean, you and I both know the human brain is fundamentally a social organ. It requires connection to regulate itself.
Absolutely.
So if a mind is dropped into an environment packed with people, but is entirely incapable of breaching that social barrier, what does it do? Because it can't just power down, right?
No, it goes into overdrive. When the brain is deprived of accessible human interaction, it doesn't just stop seeking connection.
Right.
It simply forces those connections onto the inanimate or the inaccessible. And this is exactly where we see the architecture of our narrator's urban loneliness.
Okay, walk us through that.
Well, he introduces himself as a young man who has lived in Petersburg for almost a decade with, quote, hardly an acquaintance. He walks the streets constantly. And because he cannot speak to anyone, he copes by personifying the city itself.
Wow.
Yeah, he studies the faces of the crowds, absorbing their emotional weather. He actually says he feels gay when they are happy and downcast when they are sad.
I want to stop right there, actually, because I think it's easy to read that and think, oh, he's just highly empathetic. He's a people watcher.
Right, a sensitive soul.
Exactly, but that's entirely missing the mechanism at play here. This isn't empathy. This is a survival strategy. Have you ever looked into Dunbar's number?
The anthropological theory, right?
Yeah.
That humans can only comfortably maintain about 150 stable social relationships.
Yes, exactly. The cognitive limit. So think of the brain as having this slot machine with 150 empty slots, and they are screaming to be filled.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right. If he can't fill those slots with colleagues or friends, he fills them with strangers. He's essentially hacking his own neurochemistry.
He's tricking his brain.
Yes. He's watching a guy laugh on the street, and his brain is firing as if he is part of that joke just to keep his social circuits from atrophying. He's mentally writing himself into a community as a silent, invisible participant.
Oh, that is such a great way to put it. And we see that cognitive hack escalate perfectly with the old man on the Fontanka embankment.
Oh, the old man, yes.
Yeah, he forms what he explicitly calls a friendship with this older gentleman he sees every day at the exact same hour.
And he notices everything about him.
Everything.
Yeah.
The narrator notes his grave face, the way he mutters to himself, the way he brandishes his left arm, and he carries this long, gnarled stick with a gold knob.
Right.
And our narrator becomes completely convinced that this old man takes a, quote, warm interest in him.
But they've never spoken, not a single word, ever.
Never. Yet the narrator feels a genuine emotional drop, like a real tangible disappointment if they don't cross paths.
Wow.
And the climax of this entire relationship is that one day, after a 2-day absence, they lock eyes and actually reach up to touch their hats to bow to one another.
And then they freeze.
Exactly.
Mm.
At the very last millisecond, they both drop their hands and pass each other by. It is an agonizing moment of near connection.
I really want to push back on the idea that this is just typical shyness, though.
Okay, how so?
Well, that moment where they drop their hands, that is the terror of reality threatening a perfectly safe fantasy.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it. The moment you bow, the moment you acknowledge someone, you invite unpredictability. What if the old man scowls? What if he wants to talk and the narrator has nothing to say?
Right, the bubble bursts.
Exactly. As long as they don't speak, the old man can be the perfect silent friend. It's the ultimate parasocial relationship.
That is a fascinating way to frame it. You're applying modern parasocial attachment theory to a 19th century text, and honestly, it fits flawlessly.
It's the exact same psychological mechanism. I mean, think about how people operate today. You can watch your vlogger every single day for years.
Oh, sure.
You know their kitchen layout, you know their dog's name, you know all their childhood traumas. Your brain is releasing oxytocin and dopamine as if you were hanging out with your best friend.
But they don't know you.
Right. That creator has absolutely no idea you exist. And secretly, a lot of people prefer it that way because a parasocial relationship requires zero maintenance. You never have to compromise, you never have to be vulnerable, and you can never be rejected.
You're in total control.
Yes. The old man on the embankment is just an analog Twitch streamer for our narrator.
An analog Twitch streamer. I love that.
Yeah.
And, you know, when human beings prove too risky even for that, when even the near bow is too much stress, the narrator's brain takes it a step further.
Oh, the houses.
Yes, he anthropomorphizes the actual architecture of St. Petersburg. The buildings literally become his closest confidants. He walks down the street and imagines the houses running forward to greet him from every window.
Which is just wild to picture.
It really is. He literally quotes them. He hears them say, "Good morning, how do you do? I am quite well, thank God, and I am to have a new story in May."
Which leads to the absolute tragedy of the pink house.
Yes.
He has this favorite house, a beautiful light pink brick building. And he walks by one day and imagines he hears it plaintively crying out to him, "They are painting me yellow."
The color of the celestial empire, as he notes with absolute disgust.
Right. He hates the yellow, and he gets so upset that he feels physically ill. He says it makes him bilious, and he refuses to visit his disfigured friend anymore.
So dramatic.
It is. And, you know, it's very easy to read this as just quirky, whimsical behavior. But look at the underlying mechanics. Why a house?
Because it's safe.
Exactly, because a house is the ultimate safe attachment object. A house cannot abandon you. A house doesn't judge you for having zero friends. By projecting his need for affection onto brick and mortar, he's insulating himself from the sheer terror of human rejection.
But that insulation is incredibly fragile.
Extremely.
It requires the environment to remain completely static. And that brings us to a massive psychological rupture in the narrative.
Yes.
The changing of the seasons. Right. Spring arrives in St. Petersburg, and instead of feeling reborn, our narrator falls into a crushing, profound dejection for 3 entire days.
Oh, it's so bleak.
He wanders the streets, he retreats to his grimy green room, which, by the way, is maintained by this apathetic housekeeper named Matrona, who lets massive spider webs grow on the ceiling.
Ah, the spider webs.
Yeah, and he feels like his entire world is actively hostile to him.
And what's the trigger for this breakdown? It's not a personal tragedy. It's real estate.
Exactly.
The season is over, and the entire middle and upper class of St. Petersburg is packing up and moving to their summer villas, their dachas in the country.
And to understand why this breaks him, you really have to understand the historical context of the 1840s St. Petersburg dacha exodus.
Right, set the scene for us.
This wasn't just a few people going on vacation. It was a massive, highly visible societal shift. When the brief, glorious summer arrived, the city, which was stuffy, swampy, and honestly prone to cholera outbreaks, was practically evacuated by anyone with means.
Leaving only the impoverished, the bureaucratic drudges, and our totally isolated narrator behind.
Exactly.
And so he becomes this obsessive, frantic, amateur detective. He stands on the streets studying the faces of the people packing up, and he categorizes them.
He really does.
He notes that the elegant, fashionable people in fine carriages, they're going to Kameny and Aptekarsky Islands. The dignified folks, Kargolowa, the people with irrepressible gaiety, Krastosky Island.
It's like he's sorting them.
Yeah, and he watches mountains of furniture, ottomans, sofas, tables being loaded onto wagons guarded by decrepit cooks. He sees boats crawling along the Neva River loaded with household goods.
And notice the language he uses there. He says these wagons and boats are, quote, multiplied 100-fold in his eyes. The city is threatening to become a wilderness. But, I mean, why does he care? Why is he categorizing everyone?
Because it's a taxonomy of his own exclusion.
Yes.
If your entire social network consists of observing the crowd, the city emptying out isn't just a shift in traffic patterns, it is a catastrophic loss of your entire perceived community.
Oh, absolutely.
He actually says, absolutely no one invited me. It seemed they had forgotten me, as though really I were a stranger to them, which is objectively true.
He is a stranger.
He is a stranger, but his subjective pain is very, very real.
Which brings up the concept of the pathetic fallacy, right? Attributing human emotion to inanimate nature. The narrator isn't just sad. He's projecting his immense internal sense of abandonment onto the entire city.
Wow.
He feels personally victimized by the municipal schedule. And this is a cognitive defense mechanism against total mental collapse. If the city is abandoning him, then he at least has a relationship with the city.
Oh, that's dark.
Right. To be maliciously left behind implies you were part of the group to begin with. It is infinitely better to feel betrayed by Petersburg than to admit that Petersburg doesn't even know you exist.
That is a brilliant distinction. Anger and betrayal are connections. Apathy is just a void.
Exactly.
So feeling entirely suffocated by this perceived abandonment, he just walks and walks until he accidentally crosses the city limits. He walks out into the country.
And everything shifts.
It does. The moment he crosses that threshold, the burden lifts. The architecture of his loneliness is gone. The fields act as a balm. He suddenly feels the passersby are looking at him kindly.
It's a complete sensory reset for him. And it prompts him to make one of the most striking metaphors in the text.
The consumptive girl.
Yes. He compares the Petersburg spring to a frail, consumptive girl, someone dying of tuberculosis. He describes how you might look at her with compassion, or ignore her entirely. Until suddenly, for one instant, she flashes with this vibrant, inexplicable beauty. Her cheeks flush, her eyes catch fire, she laughs brightly.
It's very vivid.
You are entirely intoxicated by her. But the very next day, she returns to her pale, timid, mournful self. And you're left grieving that this momentary beauty faded so quickly and that you had not even time to love her.
Okay, I have to ask you about that specific phrasing.
Go for it.
Not even time to love her. Because to me, that consumptive girl metaphor perfectly encapsulates his toxic worldview.
How so?
Well, he's aestheticizing tragedy. He doesn't look at spring and see rebirth or farming or vitality. He sees a beautiful, dying girl. He sees beauty as something that is inherently fleeting, tragic, and most importantly, fundamentally inaccessible to him.
Oh, that's a sharp observation.
Right. It reinforces his identity as the eternal outsider. He never gets to participate. He only gets to grieve that he didn't have time to love.
You're absolutely right to call it a toxic worldview. It's a romanticization of his own impotence. By framing beauty as something that is always already dying, he excuses his inability to engage with it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't be expected to build a life with a consumptive girl.
Yeah.
You can only watch her fade. But, this specific moment, this emotional high in the countryside, is mechanically necessary for what happens next.
Setting the stage.
Exactly. His neurological state has been entirely altered. The rigid defensive posture he holds in the city has been temporarily dismantled.
The dam has been weakened.
Yes.
And the timing couldn't be more critical. He's walking home. It's past 10 p.m. He's walking along the canal embankment, which is totally deserted. And because he's still riding this bizarre, solitary high from the fields, he's actually humming and singing to himself.
Yeah, he notes that this is what happy men do when they have no friends to share their joy with.
Even in his highest moments, he is hyper-aware of his profound solitude. It never leaves him.
No.
But then, suddenly, leaning on the canal railing, he spots a woman. She's wearing a yellow hat and a black mantle. She's staring intently at the muddy water, and as he passes by, holding his breath, he hears a muffled sob. She is crying.
Now let's analyze the friction between his internal state and reality right here.
Yeah.
Because any well-adjusted person might simply walk up and say, "Hey, are you okay?"
Right.
But our narrator is paralyzed by his own internal library of tropes. He wants to step towards her and say, "Madam," but he literally stops himself because he realizes that exclamation belongs in cheap Russian society novels.
Oh my gosh, yes. He is self-editing his spontaneous social interactions based on literary criticism.
Exactly.
A woman is literally crying over a dark canal at night, and he's worried about sounding cliche. I mean, he is so trapped in fiction that he can't navigate reality.
It's absurd, but so human.
And while he's frozen in this ridiculous internal debate, the girl notices him, gets spooked, and walks quickly away. He follows her, his heart fluttering, and then the universe forces his hand.
Yes, a staggering older gentleman in evening dress appears. A man of, quote, dignified years, though by no means of dignified carriage. This drunk gentleman sees the girl running and instantly gives chase.
The girl shrieks,
Huh.
and our narrator, who hasn't spoken to a human being in years, flies across the street. He has this excellent knotted stick with him.
The famous pick.
He intercepts the drunk gentleman, brandishes the stick as an irresistible argument, and the older man backs off. Our narrator turns to the terrified girl and says, "Give me your arm," and he won't dare to annoy us further. She takes his arm without a word.
The physical shock of that moment cannot be overstated. A woman, a real breathing woman, has taken his arm. The physical barrier is finally broken.
And the psychological dam completely shatters. What follows is one of the most intense, unfiltered verbal dumps in literary history.
Absolutely.
He realizes she isn't going to drive him away, and he just starts pouring out his soul. He tells her he is 26 years old, has 0 friends, has never spoken to a woman in his life except for his landladies, and only dreams of them.
The juxtaposition Dostoevsky creates here is just masterful. The narrator goes from being entirely mute, unable to even bow to an old man, to confessing his deepest, most pathetic insecurities to a strange woman on a dark street in the span of 5 minutes.
But I need to push back on this entirely.
Okay, let's hear it.
Is this actually a beautiful moment of vulnerability, or is it deeply manipulative?
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Think about the power dynamics. She is a young woman who was just chased by a drunk predator in the dark. She is terrified. She takes the arm of her rescuer, and immediately this guy starts trauma dumping on her.
He really does.
He tells her he frequently fantasizes about begging aristocratic ladies in the street just to say 2 sisterly words to him. He is making a terrified, vulnerable woman entirely responsible for his emotional state because she's too polite, or frankly too scared, to let go of his arm.
Well, I wouldn't call it conscious manipulation, but you are definitely highlighting the inherent selfishness of the chronically lonely. When a starving person finds food, they don't care about table manners. They gorge themselves. He has been starved of conversation for 26 years. He lacks the social calibration to realize he is overwhelming her.
That's a fair point.
But what makes the scene work, what prevents Nastenka from running away screaming, is the paradox of his profound shyness.
How so? Like, why doesn't she run?
Because his vulnerability is so absolute, his confession is so pitiful, that it completely strips him of any traditional masculine threat.
Oh, I see.
He isn't putting on a suave facade. He is telling her, essentially, I am a desperate, pathetic loser who makes up romances in his head. It actually disarms her. In a strange way, his total lack of power makes her feel entirely safe with him.
Okay, so it's like the ultimate anti-rom-com meet cute. Instead of playing it cool, he just hands her his entire psychiatric file on day 1. And remarkably, Nastenka is charmed by it. She tells him that women like such extreme timidity.
It works for him.
Yeah. They arrive at her street, and they agree to meet the very next day at 10 p.m. But she lays down one absolute, non-negotiable condition. She says, "I am ready for friendship, but you mustn't fall in love with me, I beg you."
To which he grips her hand and swears, "I swear." A promise he is, of course, destined to break before the words even leave his mouth.
Obviously.
So he goes home, doesn't sleep a wink, and walks the streets in sheer ecstasy. But surviving the initial adrenaline spike of the first night is easy. The real challenge is the second night, when the shock has worn off, and he actually has to engage in a structured conversation.
Right, because they meet the next night, and Nastenka is entirely grounded. She demands that they be sensible. She spent the day analyzing what happened, and she demands to know his history minutely. What sort of man are you? She asks.
She wants the facts.
Yeah, and to make him comfortable, she actually shares the mechanics of her own isolation.
Yes, and her isolation is intensely physical. She lives with her blind grandmother. And because Nastenko was rebellious a couple of years prior, the grandmother enforces discipline through literal physical tethering.
It's so weird.
It's claustrophobic. She calls Nastenka up and uses a pin to attach Nastenka's dress to her own. The grandmother knits, and Nastenka sits beside her, pinned, reading or sewing for days on end.
It's a striking, suffocating image. But when she asks the narrator for his history, he completely deflects. He claims he has no history. He says he has lived keeping myself to myself, that is, utterly alone.
He dodges the question.
He completely dodges it. He announces that he isn't really a person with a history. He is a type, an original, an absurd person. He defines himself as a dreamer.
And Nastenka immediately relates to this term. Being physically pinned to a blind woman, she admits she daydreams of marrying a Chinese prince just to escape the sheer oppression of her reality. But pay close attention to how the narrator decides to elaborate on this type. He asks Nastenka for permission to tell his own story in the third person. He says, one feels awfully ashamed to tell it in the first person.
Okay, this is a massive psychological red flag, isn't it?
Oh, massive.
He's employing a distancing mechanism. By labeling himself a type and speaking in the third person, he's putting himself in a museum display case. Step right up, observe the pathetic dreamer in his natural habitat.
Yes, exactly.
It's a way of avoiding genuine, messy vulnerability.
Precisely. If he describes himself as a character in a story, he controls the narrative. He can make his loneliness sound poetic, tragic, and inevitable, rather than sad, awkward, and fixable.
That's so true.
What's fascinating here is that it protects his fragile ego from her direct judgment. It is much easier to critique a character than to critique oneself.
I think this is where the text becomes uncomfortably relevant for a modern listener. Think about how we use labels on the internet today.
Oh, absolutely.
How often do we see people use terms like introvert, neurodivergent, or socially awkward, not as a starting point for understanding themselves, but as an impenetrable shield?
Right, it becomes a barricade.
Yeah, we adopt these clinical or pseudo-clinical labels to excuse our lack of engagement with the world. Oh, I can't go to that social event, I'm an introvert. It stops being a description of behavior and becomes a rigid identity that prevents you from ever having to do the hard work of making connections. The narrator uses the word dreamer in the exact same way.
And it's a very comfortable trap.
Yeah.
When you define yourself entirely by your isolation, you no longer have an obligation to fight it. You accept it as your fundamental nature.
Yeah.
And having established this protective barrier, the narrator launches into a sweeping, tragicomic monologue to Nastenka about what it actually feels like to be this dreamer.
And he paints a grim picture. He compares the dreamer to a tortoise, a creature that is its own house hiding inside its shell. He describes his room, those 4 grimy green walls reeking of tobacco smoke.
Such a visceral image.
And then he describes, in excruciating detail, the absolute agony of an unexpected visit from a friend.
His description of this social encounter is honestly a masterclass in the physical symptoms of social anxiety. The host himself is completely paralyzed. He is overcome with confusion, acting as though he had just committed a terrible crime, like forging counterfeit notes.
Right.
He can't speak. There's no laughter. The friend who drops by tries to smooth things over, but the atmosphere is so unbearably tense that the friend suddenly remembers very necessary business which never existed and just flees.
And the narrator compares himself in that moment to an unhappy kitten. A kitten that has been roughly handled, terrorized by children until it scurries under a chair in the dark to bristle up, spit, and wash its insulted face with both paws.
It's so specific.
It's funny, but it's deeply sad. The outside world, even a well-meaning friend just dropping by to say hello, is experienced as a violent intrusion. His solitude is the only place he isn't being terrorized.
But the solitude itself isn't empty. And this is where we have to look at the neuroscience of the daydreamer. When he finishes work and walks home, he describes the goddess of fancy taking over.
Ah, yes.
The default mode network of his brain, the system that activates when we aren't focused on the outside world, goes into absolute overdrive.
He completely disconnects from reality. He walks down the street with a broad, meditative smile, gesticulating wildly to himself. He almost gets run over.
He does.
He frightens a little girl who moves out of his way in alarm. He has a physical body navigating Petersburg, but his mind is in a completely different universe.
Huh?
He gets home, eats a dinner he doesn't even taste, and the fantasies truly bloom.
He lists these grand, epic, cinematic universes for Nastenka. He isn't just daydreaming about a promotion at
Oh,
work.
no.
He dreams of being a poet crowned with laurels. He is friends with the famous writer Hoffman. He is fighting in the St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre. Right. He is the hero, taking Kazan, alongside Ivan Vasilievich. He is romancing Cleopatra. He envisions a perfect, frictionless domestic bliss in a little house. He lives 1,000 different lives, and he is the center of every single one of them.
And this is where he delivers the most important philosophical realization of the entire story. He admits to Nastenka that this fantasy life is a voluptuous poison.
A voluptuous poison.
That is such a stunning contradiction in terms.
It's the perfect description of hyperreality, preferring the simulation to the real world. I mean, the imagination is an incredible evolutionary tool. It allows us to empathize, to innovate, to create art.
Yeah.
But when it is completely untethered from reality, when there is no anchor, it becomes a narcotic. The dreamer constructs these elaborate universes where he is powerful, heroic, and deeply loved, precisely because in the real world, he feels utterly powerless, invisible, and unloved.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He looks at real life and calls it torpid and insipid. He actually feels superior to regular people who are exhausted by their mundane, everyday lives.
He pities them.
He views himself as the ultimate artist, creating his life every hour to suit his latest whim. Why on earth would you bother with the messy, unpredictable, often disappointing nature of real human relationships when you can script the absolute perfect romance in your head? In your head, no one ever gets sick, no one ever misunderstands you, no one ever leaves you.
But the real tragedy of this character is his immense self-awareness. He's not delusional. He knows he's drinking poison.
He knows it?
He knows he's wasting his youth. He tells Nastenka that he foresees a mournful hour approaching when he would trade all his years of fantasy for one single day of pitiful real life.
Wow.
He recognizes that a life without friction, without the pain and unpredictability of another human being, is not actually a life. It's a waiting room. He sees the bars of his cage perfectly clearly, but he lacks the strength to open the door.
I want to tie this directly back to how we live today, because this 19th century voluptuous poison is exactly what we're experiencing with modern digital escapism. Think about a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. You can log in for 14 hours a day. In that digital world, you have a clear purpose, you have quests, you are powerful, you have comrades who rely on you, you are respected.
Intoxicating.
It is a perfectly engineered, frictionless fantasy where you are the hero. But eventually, the server goes down for maintenance, you take the headset off, the screen goes dark, and you are sitting alone in a messy, grimy room, and you realize your actual physical life has completely gathered dust.
It's the exact same psychological loop.
Yeah.
Or consider the endless doom scrolling on social media.
Oh, yeah.
You are peering into perfectly curated aesthetic lives. You're experiencing vicarious thrills, outrage, envy, and joy. You are consuming massive amounts of emotional data, living 1,000 different lives through a glowing rectangle.
While your physical body remains entirely sedentary and isolated on a couch.
Exactly. We are all engaging with a voluptuous poison. We are all, to some degree, Dostoevsky's dreamer, preferring the safety of the screen to the risk of the street.
And Nastenka sees the tragedy in this. When he finally finishes this grand, sweeping, pathetic monologue about his empty life, he looks at her, and she is brought to tears. She says, "No, that won't do. That must not be." She cries for him.
It's a really moving moment.
It really is, and he tells her that meeting her has made him realize that his isolated life is a crime and a sin. Because for 2 evenings, just sitting on a bench by a canal talking to a real girl, he has actually truly lived.
He took the ultimate risk. He dropped the shield of the third-person narrative. He stepped out of his type and exposed his absolute darkest, most pathetic secret, his profound emptiness, to another human being.
Yeah.
And instead of reacting like the friend who flees the grimy green room in terror, Nastenka validates his existence with her tears. She proves that reality, with all its messiness and unpredictability, can offer a connection that no fantasy involving Cleopatra ever could.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's distill the key takeaways from this deep dive. We've explored the intricate architecture of urban loneliness.
We have.
We've seen how extreme isolation doesn't just empty the mind. It forces the brain to aggressively construct rich, sometimes deeply toxic inner worlds. We've seen how the human mind will anthropomorphize a brick building or form a parasocial bond with an old man on the street long before it will accept the reality of total solitude.
And we've examined how the pathetic fallacy isn't just a literary trope, but a vital cognitive defense mechanism. And we've seen how the intense, starving craving for human connection can bypass all social norms, causing a paralyzed, chronically shy person to bare their entire soul to a complete stranger by a canal.
Simply because the dam finally broke.
Exactly.
And most importantly, we've looked at the universal, timeless danger of the voluptuous poison, the deeply seductive trap of preferring the total safety and control of our fantasies, our screens, and our daydreams, to the messy, unpredictable, but ultimately real nature of human life.
So we ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own habits. Where is your green room? What fantasies, what digital landscapes, what carefully curated screens do you retreat into when the real world feels too daunting, too awkward, or too uncontrollable?
Are you using modern labels to justify your isolation?
Are you actually living, or are you just observing the faces in the crowd from a very safe distance?
I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to ponder. Our narrator has just taken a massive, terrifying leap. He has stepped out of his lifelong safe dream to make a real, messy connection with Mastenka. He's tasted reality.
But here's the question.
Right. When a chronic dreamer, someone who has spent 26 years scripting perfect romances in his head, finally touches reality, can that reality ever possibly live up to the perfection of the fantasy? Or, by leaving the absolute safety of his own mind, is he setting himself up for a heartbreak that will be far worse and far more destructive than his loneliness ever was?
Is the ultimate risk of waking up.
We started this deep dive by talking about being alone in a crowded room. We often want loneliness to be like a broken bone, a clean, visible fracture we can point to and easily fix.
But it rarely is.
No.
Yeah.
As we've seen on the 19th century streets of St. Petersburg, the diagnostic landscape of isolation is incredibly murky. Sometimes the deepest, most dangerous loneliness doesn't look like an empty room at all. It looks like a vibrant cinematic fantasy playing on a continuous loop in the mind of someone who has completely forgotten how to say hello. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.